This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Starting the show is K-State's Drew Ricketts and Joe Gerken with another episode of Fins, Fur, and Feathers. This week they talk about vultures and what issues they could create for farmers. A discussion about grain bin safety with Oklahoma State University grain storage engineer Carol Jones keeps the show going. She mentions what can cause grain bin accidents and what to do if caught in grain. K-State dairy specialist Mike Brouk finishes today's show by relaying the importance of annual herd checks and reviewing health records and events with your veterinarian. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Tuesday show with another episode of Fins, Fur, and Feathers with K-State's Drew Ricketts and Joe Gerken.
Today, Drew, we're going to talk about vultures, specifically about turkey vultures and black vultures.
Yeah, that's right. We've got both species in Kansas, black vultures just barely. We'll talk about that a little bit more along the way, but both of them are common both in North and South America. Black vulture is ubiquitous throughout South America, but it's most common in the southeastern U.S. and south down through Texas. Both of them are mainly scavengers, so they eat a lot of stuff that's already dead that they find, and because of that, they provide lots of valuable cleanup services to us in North America, especially during the warmer months if you're north of southern Kansas. And then, if you're south of that line, you might have both species of vultures year-round that are out there cleaning up dead stuff throughout the year.
Is it common now to see both of these species throughout Kansas if we go look for them?
It's not. So most of the vultures that people see in Kansas are turkey vultures. And the best way to tell the difference is if they're sitting, you can look at their head. And the turkey vulture is going to have that bright red head that makes them look kind of like a turkey. And that's where their name comes from. And that's pretty easy to see, whereas a black vulture is going to have a black head. When they're flying, a lot of times they're far enough away that we just can't see that head coloration really easily with our bare eyes or our naked eyes. And the good thing is that you can look at the underside of their wings to tell the difference between the two species. So turkey vultures and black vultures both have some light coloration that contrasts with the black on their body really well on the underside of their wings. And the black vultures only have that out on the tip of their wings. So if you think about their wings the same as our arm and our hands and those sorts of things, you would see like the white hand on the underside, but you wouldn't see the arm as having any white or light coloration on it. Whereas the turkey vultures, they've got that light coloration from the tip of the wing all the way back to the body. It doesn't cover the whole underwing. The part of the underwing that's closest to the head won't have it, but it still will extend from the tip of the wing all the way back to their body. So that's an easy way to tell them apart. Even when they're flying really, really high, you can see that when they're soaring way high in the air.
Why do we need to tell them apart? What are their differences here?
Yeah. And the main reason that we should be concerned about telling them apart is that black vultures can be a species that kills some livestock, whereas turkey vultures almost never do that. I'm not going to say never because there are some instances where they have. But, our producers have gotten used to turkey vultures being around areas where they're calving and those sorts of things during the warmer months, but we're not necessarily used to seeing black vultures in those areas. And then we also are hearing our neighboring states promote programs that allow for the control of black vultures because they could be depredating our livestock. So folks get excited when they hear those things. And what I'd really like to do first is just kind of go through the different kinds of damage that these two species cause. So roosts are the most common issue that we have in Kansas with vultures, and this is mainly turkey vultures, right? Because it's something that's happening in the areas where they are spending a lot of time when they're in our part of their geographic range, and they communally roost. And they most commonly communally roost right after they get here when they're not nesting, and then in the fall, right before they migrate. So I get the most calls about turkey vulture roosts in the spring and then starting in about August, and then up until they leave in November. The main issues associated with these roosts are accumulation of feces, and that accumulation of feces can be quite large sometimes.
So in towns, we're getting primarily turkey vultures causing problems with their big roosts. What about the black vultures?
The black vultures, the main issue with them, like we mentioned, is the depredation on livestock potentially, and that's here. I think it's important to say, though, that, if you're south of Kansas, if you're in an area where black vultures are common, then we also see these problems associated with roost with both species. So that can be a challenge, too. But we don't have enough black vultures for them to be really contributing to that problem very much in Kansas.
So we're talking about the depredation with the livestock. Are they mainly getting calves and lambs? Are they getting adults? What are they going after here?
So the most common thing would be for folks to be calving or lambing or kidding. We've got brand new baby livestock that can't get up and move around really easily, and they're laying on the ground, and the black vultures are going to peck out the soft tissues. That's how they kill things when they do kill things. And so if you get there soon enough before any coyotes or anything like that have eaten on a carcass, it's really easy to identify a carcass that's been killed by a bird. They're going to peck the eyeballs out. They're going to peck out potentially the navel, that fresh belly button. They'll pick at that. And then they'll pick out the genitals or the anus. So those are the main areas that they're going to target. And there's going to be a lot of blood associated with that too, because, if they kill something, the heart's still beating while they're attacking those areas. So that's what a producer should be looking for if they think that they've got depredation associated with these species. The main reason that we see either species of vulture around calving areas or lambing areas and those sorts of things is kind of the same reason that we see coyotes in those places. There's afterbirth laying around. There's byproducts of that birthing process that scavengers like to eat. And when we have especially a turkey vulture roost close by where we're calving, sometimes those vultures will come in and there'll be large numbers of those birds, and what they're really after is the afterbirth. But if the calf is still close by that afterbirth and we've got a whole bunch of vultures going after that afterbirth, then mom might think that they're a threat to the calf, right? And sometimes it may be that mom's trying to defend the calf from all these vultures that are right there, and she actually stomps on the calf sometimes. So that's sort of a secondary way that depredation can occur, or that calf loss could occur too.
Do we always need to be worried if we see a large number of vultures around our livestock then?
Not most of the time. Most of the time where we live, you're going to see turkey vultures in those areas, and they're out there cleaning things up. They're not out there to kill things. Almost all the vulture calls that I get from producers end up being turkey vultures when I go out there to look at them. And almost all those calls don't have any loss associated with them. Most of those calls are somebody who's pretty close to our neighbors in Oklahoma or our neighbors in Missouri who have depredation orders on the black vultures, and they see all the vultures out there, and so they're concerned about it, and they're wanting to do something proactively. And that's sort of a false concern in a lot of these instances when it's turkey vultures.
Let's talk a little more about that depredation order. Do we have one of those in Kansas?
We don't. So under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, if you have a species that's causing property damage, if you can provide evidence of that property damage, then you can apply for a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service permit for take of the species that's causing you a problem. So in areas where black vultures are common, either Farm Bureau or the state Department of Agriculture oftentimes has applied to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for a blanket order for take, a blanket depredation order for take for the black vultures, so that we don't have this delay in the process for getting that take. Because, let's say a producer has a black vulture issue. They find a dead calf that's clearly been killed by a black vulture. They first have to collect evidence. Then they need to reach out to either me or Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks if you're in Kansas, or the USDA Wildlife Services, who are going to help them get that permit through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And by the time they get that permit for this year, their problem might be over, because it's a little bit of a time-consuming process if we're wanting to use lethal control. The non-lethal methods aren't affected by this, but the lethal methods are. So these other states that have larger populations of black vultures have these blanket depredation orders, so that if you're a producer who knows you're going to be calving and you've had black vultures on your property, or if you know you're going to be lambing or have these young livestock and you're in an area with black vultures, you can apply for one of those permits to be a sub-permittee under that blanket order, and that will allow you to take so many black vultures in a given year. It's going to be 3 or 5 or a small number like that, right? So it's not going to, you don't get authorization to just shoot all the black vultures that come in, but it does give you the opportunity to use some lethal control on these birds, and only black vultures, not turkey vultures, that are causing problems for you when you're calving.
Well, that was another fun topic to talk about, a great idea that came from a listener. Again, if you're listening to this, you have ideas, definitely reach out. We look forward to having you join us next time on Fins, Fur, and Feathers.
Once again, that was Joe Gerken and Drew Ricketts. You can listen to the full episode of Fins, Fur, and Feathers on the podcast streaming platform of your choice. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our Tuesday show discussing grain bin safety. And to talk about it, we're joined by Oklahoma State University grain storage engineer Carol Jones. Carol, thanks for joining us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
First, talking about hopefully avoiding to even have to get into the grain bin, and all starting with how that grain is put into the bin.
That is critical, and how you take care of it during the storage season is important too. Grain never gets better in storage. The quality never improves. You can add value to it by doing different things like processing or blending or marketing, but the quality never improves. So what you put into the bin, the best you can hope for is it stays the same as what you put in the bin. It's the best it's ever going to be, just going into the bin. So when we put wet grain into a bin, it's going to mold. It has spots in it that become clumps, and then they won't come out the reclaim auger later on. The grain will stick to the wall. Just some really bad things happen in that storage environment that we really can't do a lot about until we take it out of the bin. So putting good grain in the bin in the first place is the first step towards safety. And of course, you make more money with better grain too.
Maybe when people are getting that grain back out of the bin, hopefully still not having to get in it. And so what are a few things that maybe they can do around the bin?
Making sure that your bin, the structure of it is good. Our infrastructure is getting older across the country, and we see more leaks. We see some degradation around the doorways of steel bins, more cracking and concrete problems in our big concrete silos. So keeping maintenance at a peak is important. Make sure no moisture gets in the bin. Make sure all of the entryways and manholes are covered good and tight. If we have temperature cables, that's a really good thing to keep maintenance up on. That's your communication with your grain in the bin. We really don't know what's going on in that bin unless we have temperature cables or some way to monitor the quality. So maintenance is super important, and it's not only just for safety, but it keeps the quality of your grain at a peak also.
And as we're thinking about safety for people who have to get in the grain bin, what are a few things that they really need to do?
Well, first of all, don't work alone. Have someone close by that you can keep in touch with, or that can keep in touch with you either by sight or by cell phone or radio, or some way to communicate in case you do have some kind of a problem in there. They can call for help. There's been many times that fire department gets a call from a wife when a family member doesn't show up for supper and he's been in the bin for a while and it doesn't turn out good. So have someone there that can call for help if you get in trouble. Lockout, tag out. I know it makes your job a lot harder to turn that reclaim auger off when you go in the bin. But if that reclaim auger is not guarded properly, you get caught in the flow of the grain, and it's just pretty hard to save yourself. So turn off all of the energy to the bin. You don't want any grain coming in the bin, and anything that moves the grain needs to be de-energized. So with that in mind, want to wear harness, lifeline if you're going to go into the grain, if it's any chance of you becoming entrapped. In other words, if the grain could possibly be over 4 feet deep, then you need to be in a harness and a lifeline tied off to an anchor point someplace on the outside of the bin.
And for people getting trapped, there are 3 different main ways that you often see people having issues.
Grain gets stuck to the side of a wall in the bin, which is typical mainly in steel bins. It doesn't happen a lot in concrete bins. In steel bins, the temperature difference at the bin wall with the grain causes some condensation. So you'll get material stuck to the bin wall. And so when that lets loose, it makes an avalanche. And that can certainly cover someone or at least sweep their feet out from under them. A second way is if there's a bridge. This happens a lot in corn. So we've emptied grain out of this bin, but you look in the bin and it looks like you haven't emptied any grain at all because you have a shelf. And that's caused by condensation. Moisture of some kind has made a crust on the top. And so when you step on that, there's only one place for you to go when it breaks through. And that's down into the grain with a lot of grain on top of you. And your chances of survival are very slim. So we want to be sure that we watch for that. The third way is to get caught in the flow of the grain. That's when the auger is on at the bottom of the bin. Reclaim auger is on. You know, as kids, we played in the bin with the auger running, but it was only running at maybe 1,000 bushel an hour. Now we move grain at 20,000 bushel an hour. So there's just no way to keep yourself safe when that grain is flowing that fast.
Carol, unfortunately, if someone does get stuck in the grain bin, what are a few things that people should keep in mind if trying to get them back out?
Well, first of all, don't become a victim yourself as a rescuer. And that's where a lot of training comes in. You'll want to call 911. Whoever is working with you needs to know who to call. That's going to alert your neighborhood fire department, and they need to know what to do. So we have quite a bit of training available around the country, and we'll talk about OSU's training here in a little bit with our trailer, but they need to know what to do. Until they get there, what you can do is keep the victim as quiet, calm as possible, because the more they move, the more grain's going to come down on top of them. Don't get in the bin with the victim, because every time you step, more grain will come in on top of them as well. You can keep from going into the bin with the person. That's optimal. That's hard not to do, to not get in that bin with someone, because especially if it's a family member or someone close, you want to get in and work with them, but you're really not helping them by doing that. Every time you make a movement, more grain comes down on top of them. We've had reports as much as 2 feet comes down in on a victim, and if they weren't covered before, you just covered your victim. Once someone is covered with grain, unless they've got something over their face, they don't have long to live. It's just a sad thing that happens. If you find yourself being pulled down into the grain, first thing you want to do is pull your shirt up over your head or put your cap down over your face, something to keep the grain from going into your mouth and nose. People die because the grain gets into their airways and they can't breathe. Another thing that can happen is if you're not in the best of health or shape, every time you breathe out, your chest comes in and more grain comes in around your body, and it's harder to get that next breath because you're working against the grain. And after a period of time, that can really tire you out. But more times than not, when we lose someone, it's because their lungs have become full of grain. So anything you can do to keep your airways open is really important. So when the fire department gets there, hopefully they have a cofferdam. A cofferdam is a piece of equipment that we put around a victim. You know, when you scoop grain, just more comes back in. It's like playing in beach sand at the lake. And so the more you dig, the more it comes in, and grain does the same thing. So in order to get the grain away from our victim, we have to put a barrier around them. We call that a cofferdam or a rescue tube. And hopefully your fire department has one of those. If they don't, things like plywood, garbage cans opened up, anything to make a barrier so you can scoop the grain away from your victim and keep more from coming down in on them. And then once that grain is removed from around your victim down below their knees, then you can help that victim get out of the mess that they're in. Actually, if you're into grain over your knees, you can't get yourself out. The forces are so intricate and so great in a grain bin that our victim can't help himself. Hopefully, he's in good enough health, in good enough condition when you get to him that he can be of a help to you. He may not be. So then you're going to have to remove the grain down to where you can see the tops of his shoes. You don't want to pull on the human body with the forces that it would take to pull someone up out of grain, because you're going to do a lot more damage than you want.
Carol, you mentioned the OSU training trailer for grain bin safety, and could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, we have a semi-trailer that has 2 grain bins in it and small grain bins, and we can simulate an entrapment in that trailer. It's sponsored by OSHA, Department of Labor, through the Susan Harwood grant, and we train an awful lot of people around the country. As long as we have grant funding, we can do that training for free to farmers, to co-ops, to elevators, and to fire departments. We talk a lot about confined space, what it takes to get someone out of a bin. We talk about grain quality, and then we actually do an entrapment, and we're 100% recovery so far. We're kind of proud of that. We don't want to leave any victims in our demonstrator. That you get the feeling of what it's like to be in grain, because not everybody knows what that feels like. It's an environment like no other that we know of. So just the experience of being down in that material with those physical properties is real important, especially for our firemen. They're not from the agricultural world as much as we think. And so for them to have the experience of knowing what they will be getting into when they respond to an incident is really important. So we get a lot of opportunities around the country to work with a lot of different agricultural facilities and a lot of different fire departments, and we value that opportunity to help people learn how to be safe in grain facilities.
If someone is interested in having you come demonstrate with your trailer, where can they find out more information?
Email me at jcarol@okstate.edu, and we will get you set up and on the schedule.
Carol, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today and share with us some information about grain bin safety.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, and stay safe.
That was Oklahoma State University grain storage engineer Carol Jones. I will link her email in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be back with more ahead.
This is Agriculture Today. Along with Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. We end today's program with this week's Milk Lines. Performing an annual health check with your veterinarian is an important factor in the overall health of the herd. K-State dairy specialist Mike Brouk recommends reviewing health records and summarizing health events experienced throughout the year to discuss with your veterinarian.
Today I'd like to visit with our Kansas dairy producers concerning a herd checkup for your dairy herd. Just wondering if you've scheduled an annual review of the issues in your dairy herd with health items with your local veterinarian. It's really important to stay on top of what's going on in your herd as it comes to health matters, and scheduling an annual review with your veterinarian is a very important part of your farm practices. Some of the things I would suggest that you visit with your veterinarian about would be things like herd health events. When we think about the lactating cows, take a look back in your records and summarize things maybe by month over the last year for the different events like metritises or DAs or other various health events that you might be seeing in your herd. Share this data with your veterinarian. See if there are any suggestions that he or she might add to your herd health protocols to help minimize these issues. It's important as you look at these issues to concentrate on things that might be going on with the transition cows as they come into milk, making sure that animals are transitioning into the lactating herd in a proper manner.
It's really important to evaluate what goes on during the summer and also what is going on when you have slugs of calves coming through the transition phase. Oftentimes, these slugs will clog the transition space and cause overcrowding in this area. This will increase the situation where we may see increases in things like DAs or metritis or off-feed problems, animals just not starting out on their lactation very well. So visiting with your veterinarian about health protocols that you might implement during these times to help minimize the effects of overcrowding are very important. Another thing that you should visit with your veterinarian about is the vaccinations that you use, both on lactating cows as well as calves and heifers if you have those on your farm. It's important to review these on an annual basis to make sure that they're still covering the issues that you might be seeing with your calves and heifers as well as your cows. And sometimes there are changes in the protocols for these different vaccines. Your veterinarian would be very helpful in making sure that you're using them appropriately and that they're being given at the appropriate times for each of the groups of animals. Another thing that should be high on your list as you sit down with your veterinarian for an annual checkup would be any prescriptions that you utilize within your dairy herd. This would include calves and heifers as well as the lactating cows, keeping in mind that prescriptions do need to be renewed on an annual basis with your herd veterinarian. So it's a good time to not only renew prescriptions, but also to identify with your veterinarian if these treatment protocols utilizing various prescriptions have actually been effective in your herd. So are animals actually recovering after you give treatments? If not, we may need to consider a different treatment protocol, and your veterinarian would be helpful in developing that protocol for your farm, and obviously would have to agree to any prescriptions that might be needed in any changes to the protocols. This is Mike Brouk with K-State Research and Extension, encouraging our dairymen to schedule an annual visit with their herd veterinarian concerning the herd health protocols on their dairy.
Thanks, Mike. And this reminder, the 111th Annual K-State Cattlemen's Day is set for this Friday in Weber Hall on the KSU campus. The day starts at 8 a.m. The program begins at 10 a.m. with K-State President Richard Linton, followed by presentations from Mike Day and Glenn Tonzer. Afternoon presentations include an update about animal sciences and industry's beef research and updates from Sandy Johnson and Drew Ricketts. Visit ksubeef.org for a detailed schedule and registration information. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.